As the prophet of esports, I rely on trustworthy and meaningful data every day. Data from our research partner YouGov offers the most complete view of esports fans and gamers in the world, providing context to who they are, what they think, the brands they buy, and things they do. YouGov's connected insights and research services inform strategy at every level. If you're a team, a brand, agency, or rights holder, you should be talking with YouGov. Their partners measure and maximize ROI and are telling compelling stories with data. Visit yougov.com/gaming-esports to learn more. Let's move on. Let's talk about Tencent. Tencent in the news, guys. And the headline here, Tencent makes another European gaming move with $1.27 billion Sumo bid. So basically, Tencent has essentially made an offer to buy out all of the sort of the remaining shares it doesn't own of Sumo Group. For those who don't know, they've made Sackboy, Hotshot Racing. They're a public company listed in London. And Tencent previously owned a 10% stake of the company. They're buying essentially the rest of the business now for $1.26 billion. We have said many times on this podcast that, you know, we were going to see more and more of these big game publishers get consolidated, being bought up. Is anyone surprised that this is Tencent buying yet another, like making a very large purchase? William, you're muted. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. This is no knock on Sumo, but I just man, that Disney acquisition of Star Wars looks better and better.
How many Star Wars is this?
This is like half a Star Wars, 3/4 of a Star Wars or something. No knock on Sackboy and Little Big Planet. Those games are amazing, but wow, what a bargain Disney got. I just think it's interesting. I mean, it shows you I think we said on the podcast, we called it, theirs is not done. There's going to be tons of developers that are getting acquired. Pretty much anyone with scale and a degree of independence is going to get merged in to one of sort of the mega conglomerate blocks that are forming. This is a great publisher with great games. Is
it worth $1.2 billion, William? Is it worth, because Codemasters was also bought for $1.2 billion.
Yep. Yeah.
Who got the better deal here? EA or Tencent? Anyone have thoughts?
I got to think about that for a second.
Codemasters is all the grid games, all their racing engine games, correct? What else is Codemasters? Right.
Pretty much F1. I don't know any other.
Yeah, I know they do grid and all the casual, dirt. I know they do all of those, but $1.2 billion for Codemasters?
I mean, does it not speak to just how red hot the market is for these game developers? There's just so much competition for these deals. There's probably, we can count on two hands all the game developers left of this size or scale, right? Left to be bought.
Yeah, and capital is cheap. Let's be honest, right? We have historically low interest rates. That's part of what's driving these asset purchases, too, I believe.
It's true. Sorry, William.
Yeah, it's tricky for me to say who got the better deal. I mean, they're both, honestly, they're both great companies with really interesting IP portfolios. My gut is, I would say the Codemasters deal is a better deal because Codemasters feels more like you're owning a space, right? With the Codemasters purchase, you are undoubtedly the preeminent driving, you own the racing space, right? There's a lot you can do with that. As great as Sackboy and Little Big Planet is, for example, it has a lot of competition with Fall Guys being the most obvious, but that kind of general safe party play, adventure world, it's a very good IP, but there's other IP that I would consider AAA in that space that compete with it. But
in terms of recency, yeah, in terms of recency, I'm not particularly sure what Sumo has put out, right? Little Big Planet is huge IP, I think, but I haven't particularly heard their name thrown around super recently for any huge releases. And I might be just completely wrong in that. If you have any information on that end, let me know. But I don't know what they've done recently.
You know what I like hearing comparisons aside is just what this indicates for the industry, right? You have companies like Tencent that have previously invested in these areas that are now more than doubling down, right? That are seeing not only the potential or the fruits of their foresight, I suppose, from years ago, but like you said, not only are they going to keep acquiring more smaller studios, I think we're going to see a lot more growth in the space because of this.
What was the Bethesda acquisition at again? Do you remember, Paul or Jimmy or other Jimmy?
8 billion, I think.
So, I mean, another way to think about this is
7.5, yeah.
Another way to think about this is say like 6 Bethesdas, right? And that, no, I mean, it's really interesting to like size it. I like to like make, because the money is so large, like you lose all scale. Like I really like to chunk it up. You know, if you put a Bethesda price on that, to be honest, I'd rather have I'd rather pay 6 times more and get a Bethesda than, you know, either of these businesses. Again, no knock on these businesses. I just think Bethesda has so much IP under it, which sort of reinforces what I think, which is the earlier you're buying in this market, the better you do, right? Like this is the moment of set. And I guarantee you there's going to be another deal at like 1.5 billion. And we're going to be like, or like 2 billion. We're going to be like, oh, you could have had 2 little big planets for that. That's crazy. But it's just, this is a scarce asset. There's very few developers with owned IP that have persisted for enough time to show that they're more than a one-hit wonder, right? Mm-hmm. And that have sort of scale and operations that they could actually fold into a commercial studio and presumably integrate well, right? There just aren't that many left. And I think we're going to see them all snatched up in the next 2 years.
There's an analyst that was quoted in this article, and I'll read the quote. Before this, though, I'll just say, like, I think part of it is also that Sumo's a public company, and to be able to buy the shares of a public company, like you have to pay a premium to the public valuation, and that public valuation was already probably pretty rich. You add that premium on top, then you end up with this is how you get to 1.2 billion. But this analyst says quoted in this article says, Sumo is a rare asset in that it is a pure play developer. To most publishers, it would be a very expensive way to bring on board 1,000 experienced developers, as it does not own any meaningful IP of its own. So they don't have a lot of IP, but they have 1,000 developers. And the argument that this analyst goes on to make is that essentially to the tech giant, I'll continue reading the quote, to the tech giants that are looking for content, e.g. Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, it would be a quick route to onboard a big studio, but a slow route to adding content to their platforms, as development would take years and lots more capital. So they think it's maybe Tencent's offer is rich and unlikely to attract counter bids, but it's maybe the only buyer that would pay this. If you do the math, though, and you believe this number of 1,000 experienced developers, at 1.2 billion, they've paid what, 1.2 million per developer, right? Is my math correct here? That's it's expensive. I mean, it's not cheap. Yeah. You're paying 1.2 million per head. But at least the feeling here is that Tencent is maybe the right buyer, and I think that's probably true, right? Like Tencent seems to find a way to extract value from these things in ways that other sort of the big players like Microsoft don't seem to. And I don't know why. I don't know if you guys have thoughts there.
I don't know, other than maybe Tencent, again, it'll folding into their operations, right? Maybe Tencent has maybe we're making a false assumption about the what the IP ownership stake is in these, the company. I presume they owned like Little Big Planet and things. They must, right? But anyway, so it's kind of sad that the analyst is saying that's not great IP.
Well, we don't, actually, we don't know, right? Like it may have been licensed from, I don't know,
Sony or something. Yeah.
Right.
But either way, just look at it as a 1,000-person development shop. I mean, Tencent sure has a lot of great companies that they might want to plug 1,000 developers ready to go into. You know what I mean? And I think the mistake that the analyst misses there is it's a slow route to content if you're developing a new game. But let's say you have a live service game that is difficult to sustain, right? True. Yeah, you're not going to get people out day one, but you don't have to wait 3 years for a game to bake. You can probably have the studio churning out content 6 months later. And this is becoming a live serve. Like the world we're entering now is becoming a live service driven world. I wonder if Tencent doesn't look at this and say this is one of the only ways we can meet a live service pipeline for, any number of Tencent games that are live service based, which is basically all of them.
And I think if they have any sort of like, what I think Tencent is good at is like experimenting with lesser known IPs and bringing them to different platforms. And honestly, what I think could be a long-term play here, William, you mentioned the, games as a service thing here, like a live platform. What if they do create that, we were talking about on another episode of the live show, rather, where it's like not an MMO, but it's an entirely online, always online connected platform for a more broad audience, right? Where you have more Little Big Planet aesthetic. It's a little more appealing to a mass audience. Maybe there is some sort of thinking down that line, right? Like much more appealing for a broad audience, always connected, always online, and maybe a mobile port for those three things to connect. And so I think with those three things in mind, maybe they have a massive audience in China or maybe globally to advertise that to. And I think that there is something among those three pillars there.
I mean, one last thought I have is and William, this is just an extension of your point, which I thought was a really good one, is the evil master plan of Tencent just to corner the market on good game developers, right? Like literally control all the bodies.
It's not, I mean, it's interesting to say, like, I don't know if it's possible to do, but it's sort of not a bad plan. Like, you're never going to corner the market on like Team Cherries, like creative, small person shops or whatever, but you could corner the market on commercial studio developers because there just aren't that many that aren't owned that that are left, and it is a different thing when you're doing commercial development at scale, right? And that's interesting. Maybe Tencent says, you know what, we think the biggest barrier to our title's success versus other titles is actually the supply of developers in. So we're going to, which is actually a thesis that might make sense to me.
And we know Activision Blizzard's struggling there.
Yeah. So we're going to be smarter than everyone else, and we're going to start buying up that supply now. So you know what? It almost doesn't matter how good our games are going to be in the future. We're one of the few companies that's going to have the talent infrastructure to sustain the games. And to Jimmy's point at the beginning of this podcast, consistency matters a lot in gaming today, right? So Tencent sort of saying here, we can be consistent, and if we buy enough of this stuff, our competitors may have trouble being consistent, which is a sure way to win. Wow, it's an interesting thought.
I think it's such a good point. I want to end on that, guys. Tencent's master plan, buy up all the game developers, all the human beings who make games,